Hello, and you are listening to Bill Murphy's Red Zone podcast. I interviewed leaders who inspire me in the areas of exponential technologies, business innovation, entrepreneurship, thought leadership, enterprise IT security, neuroscience, philosophy, personal development, and more. Welcome to the show. Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is Bill Murphy, your host of the Red Zone podcast. Today, you're going to like this episode because if you're a basketball fan, if you're a sports fan, if you're a digital leader, I don't care where you are in the food chain, but certainly if you're a CIO, but if you're in the trajectory of data analytics, anywhere along the path, entrepreneur, in an enterprise, small business, it doesn't matter. This conversation today is going to be about data analytics, what I would consider probably one of the harder areas to pull off. And my guest is Chris Pittenturf, who's the SVP of IT and analytics for the Detroit Pistons. And we had some funny conversations because he and I roughly were the same age growing up. He in Detroit and me in the Boston area. And my Boston Celtics went to battle against the Detroit Pistons back in the days of in the late 80s, early 90s with Isaiah Thomas, John Sally, Rodman, Mark Aguirre, Bill Laimbeer. And these were brutal contests against Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, Parrish, Danny Ainge from the Celtics side. So it was quite a bit of fun talking about and kind of reliving some of the older days and then talking about what today is like for information technology analytics for the sports and entertainment industry. I asked some questions that really put him back 10 years and what he's learned over the past 10 years. And if he had to do it over again, what would he do differently? And how he's really driving customer experiences. And serendipitously, as the millennial crowd comes online and starts earning more money, they want everything custom and personalized and such. So how's the entertainment industry, how's the sports industry adjusting for that? If you want to learn a little bit about some tools like Salesforce and MicroStrategy and data warehousing and some lessons learned. If you're looking for some of that, you'll get some of that from the conversation I have with him. And also, if you're starting to experience cognitive biases in your company and presenting data that both support and contradict cognitive bias, what does that look like? And I ask him a few questions related to that. So overall, I think if you have a vision for yourself of really being a powerful influence and with data analytics and helping that to drive accurate and real-time decision-making, you're going to love listening to this conversation I have with Chris, as it's going to give you a bit of a boost and maybe help give your business a bit of a kick in the pants as far as what's possible from this perspective. So with that, I want to introduce you to my conversation with Chris Pittenturf, who is the SVP of IT and Analytics with the Detroit Pistons. Enjoy. So, Chris, I want to welcome you to the show today.
Thanks, Bill. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
I know we have some really fun conversations to have about a variety of topics, and I think what would be good for everybody to understand is like where you sort of, in some respects, have like a dream job working for the team that you followed from a little kid. Maybe you can give a little bit of a lens of where you grew up and just where you now work and spend most of your time.
Yeah, so like you said, I grew up in the Detroit area as a fan of really all of the sports teams, and the Pistons were always held a pretty dear spot in my heart because of the proximity to where I grew up. So they were about 10 minutes down the road. My dad and I had made a lot of great memories when I was a child going to these games, and I played sports, and my dream really was to be the point guard for the Detroit Pistons, right? So I grew up watching Isaiah Thomas and Joe Dumars and Bill Laimbeer, the bad boys. And if you were to ask me when I was a kid, what do you want to be when you grow up, right? It was the point guard for the Detroit Pistons. And so that career goal or aspiration, I think, fizzled pretty quickly as I went through high school, and I had to course correct a little bit and find an alternative here. I wasn't going to pay the bills playing basketball, and so I found a home, I think, in the business and the technology space, and a passion in that regard. And so being able to marry two of my passions, basketball and business and IT, was really fortuitous for me.
It's fascinating because as we were talking about before we got on the show, I grew up in the Boston area, right? And, it's funny. During the 80s, the Boston had, teams that were like either bottom of the barrel or right at the top. And the Celtics, I mean, I was going to those games, because I went to high school right in the city as well. And it was a battle playing against the Pistons. I mean, it was Isaiah Thomas, Bill Laimbeer. I mean, I actually went back just to remind myself of and John Sally and Mark Aguirre. I mean, it was crazy. There was some big rivalries with Bird and Ainge and Parrish against you guys.
Oh, the biggest, right? So in Detroit, hated the Celtics. I mean, even if there was a good guy in the Celtics, you couldn't like them, because they were a Celtic. And they essentially kicked our teeth in every single spring, and we could not get past them in the playoffs. And when we finally did, I mean, that was almost like winning the championship for the fans, because we finally, vanquished this foe that it felt like impossible to do. And, the Celtics and Lakers dominated the 80s, and the Pistons were that upstart trying to break through. And yeah, those were fun times. And that's really where my love for basketball began, in watching a lot of those games.
Those are like formative times because you and I are not too different in age. I remember going out after the game. I mean, it was just, Detroit in the winter is freezing cold. Boston in the winter is freezing cold. And just going out and shooting baskets, your fingers are numb. I mean, my kids just don't know what it's like being in the kind of mid-Atlantic to be playing outdoors, basketball, trying to get some shots in during the day. But gosh, so you doubled down in basketball. You went, I think I read a quote that you went away to school to play basketball full-time and to get a degree part-time. And that's exactly my philosophy too. I thought that was funny.
Yeah, like I said, that was like my mind, like, people would ask, where are you going to major and where are you going to go to school for? And it was always hard for me to think about that because the only thing I really wanted to think about was basketball. And I just loved playing so much and I love the sport. And so it was really hard to have a perspective of what else are you going to do with your life when this ends, because not being terribly forward thinking at 17 years old or 18 years old it was a challenge.
So you end up marrying your passion with two passions, some work and sports, and that's really interesting. Let's talk a little bit about how did you get into, you've been with the Pistons, but it's really a bigger conglomeration of entities, correct? Is it now just the Pistons, or are you working more for a series of different entities under a master company?
That's a great question. And right now it's a little more complicated than probably it would have been just a couple of years ago. When I started to work for the Detroit Pistons, it was part of a broader entertainment umbrella, right? In a sense, it still is. But that entity was Palace Sports and Entertainment, and that encompassed, of course, the Detroit Pistons, but also the Palace of Auburn Hills and every single event that would come through those doors, in addition to a couple outdoor amphitheaters, Meadowbrook and DTE Energy Music Theater, formerly Pine Knob, which was a pretty big outdoor amphitheater and known nationally. And so that was what it looked like when I started. A couple of years ago, our team agreed to move downtown into a new building and be a tenant at the LCA Little Caesars Arena with the Detroit Red Wings. Now, it wasn't our building. Now we're becoming a tenant, moving from a place like the Palace that we owned and into that kind of relationship. And at the same time, we entered into a agreement with Olympia Entertainment to share in this entertainment business, right? And we formed a joint venture called 313 Presents, and that combines a couple different venues, entertainment venues on Olympia's side and a couple of the different entertainment venues on the Palace Sports and Entertainment side. And so we've become morphed into a kind of a different business model entirely over the last few years. But I'm fortunate enough to be able to support not only the Pistons, but continue to support the entertainment business from a data and analytics perspective in this joint venture.
That's fascinating. So one of the bigger themes that's been running through my CIO innovation sessions and council in the Mid-Atlantic here has been data and analytics. And I'm curious, when you got into this industry versus today, what has been some of as you look back on your decade plus in this space, what has been the biggest change that you've experienced from then to now that has been so powerful?
I think probably the most, just speaking of data and how companies use data and how businesses desire to be data-driven, and not only in their decision-making, but in how they approach their customers, right? And so if you were to look back 10 years ago, let's just use that as the spectrum of time here, at that point in time, people were just starting to really understand how they can use data and how they can provide custom experiences for their customers and be relevant and timely, really the boom of CRM, if you will. And, you look back then, and that was, for many companies, that was a competitive advantage. If they knew how to use the data, they knew how to capture it, and they knew how to centralize it and really make it operational, that was a competitive advantage. You fast forward to now, and if you are not doing that as a business, as a company, it's not a matter of competitive advantage anymore. It's a matter of necessity. So if you're not using that information to provide those custom experiences and relevant touch points, you're at not only a competitive disadvantage, but you're going to struggle to even stay in business, because it's a certainty that if you're not doing that, your competitors are. And consumers are becoming sophisticated and knowledgeable enough now where they expect this. They expect these custom touch points. They expect these relationships to be much more relevant than maybe that overarching treat everybody the same way you would find, as recently as 10 years ago.
I think what's interesting from the becoming contextually aware of your buyers and your consumers, the context of the human being, has that changed from here's a bulk human being with a heartbeat, I got to get him into the arena, to today we've got to actually have a lot more context around that individual?
100%. And it bears out just in your offerings. And so looking at sports in particular and premium offerings and what we offer the consumer, you go back, and I'll use the Palace as an example. When it opened 30 years ago, it was pretty much an arena bowl with a bunch of seats around a court. And as sports has progressed and those relationships with customers have progressed and how people are using tickets have changed, now you have just a myriad of premium offerings, a myriad of offerings that are tailored to the consumer. So you're talking about a B2B and a B2C differentiation. And understanding how that customer relates to your business through that lens is imperative, right? So somebody on the B2C side, they're coming maybe with their family or friends, and they're looking to have a good time, and maybe they're a basketball fan, that sort of thing. Most definitely they're a basketball fan, or at least they enjoy being entertained and getting out with the family. But on that B2B side, it can be very different. You could still have those same dynamics that you have on the B2C side, but now when you're talking about a B2B consumer, it's much more about networking. It's much more about entertaining, and that fanness, if you will, that kind of takes a back seat in many cases, and it's their needs and their desires and their purposes for going out that particular evening is very different than the family man or the super fan.
My kids are in high school, or almost in high school right now for some, and they've been offering this experience where, and this might be romper room for you guys, but I'm sure it is, but it really was interesting how they've been able to parlay essentially a camera if I can't make the soccer game that might be 60 miles away, they have a robot camera in the stands that essentially you can remote into and watch it as the game's going on. And nobody asked me if I wanted that experience. Nobody asked me if it was anything about it. It's just, it appeared as a capability. And I noticed in reading some material about when you guys people are in line or hustling to get to the game and they're running late, can they pop up the game on their phone and on their tablet or whatever it may be as they're making their way to their seat?
Absolutely. I mean, you could, depending on your relationship with the NBA too, right? So there's certain broadcast restrictions, but provided that you have access through a cable provider, for example, to our broadcast, you can definitely pull that up on a device and even watch it while you're walking around the concourse if you desired, right? And so that mobility, that's been a game changer, I think, for everybody. And your example, I think, is a great one. We do something very similar with our camps and clinics where we, stream these games and these sessions. So, parents that are maybe working, they can still watch them. And it's a great example of something that you didn't know you need until you used it, right? Or it was one of those things you wouldn't know you wanted until it was gone, or you had to have it until it was gone. And now you have that capability, and it becomes really what you expect. And so now it's raised the bar as a consumer, right? And this technology has raised the bar for you. And the next time or the next team that your child plays with, and if it's going to be at a distance or even if it's not, it's just going to conflict with your schedule. You're going to expect that kind of experience. You're going to expect to be able to have that service available to you. And if it's not there, you're going to probably find yourself looking for options for your kids where it is there, so you can be still fully engaged with your kids and their activities even while you're at work. So that's a great example of why it's so important. I think that we are consumer focused and we are tuned into the needs of our fans and our brand advocates so that we can provide the services that they desire.
It's interesting. I don't know if this is fully attributed to Henry Ford, which ironically would be right in your backyard, but and maybe it's just the lore of history, but didn't he say, well, if I asked consumers what they wanted, I would have given them faster horses versus actually inventing the car. And I'm curious how, from an innovation perspective, where do you balance out, well, I need to survey my end users to see what they want versus actually inventing capabilities that they didn't know that they wanted? Like, how do you balance that out with your team? Or is that even thought about, or is it just pure gut instinct?
Fantastic question. So it is always important to gauge the customer needs, and you want to have the pulse of the customer. You want to understand what they're thinking and where maybe we're coming up short or maybe where we're doing well. But that Henry Ford example is a great one because the concept of a car was so foreign or not even something that someone could imagine at that point in time. So of course it's like, yeah, if I need to get somewhere quicker, it needs to be a faster horse or whatever. And for us, it's like we have the benefit with this organization that, market research is one of the disciplines that is kind of married with our business intelligence and data collection efforts. And so we can take and we can look at, okay, this is what the customer's explicitly telling us, right? This is what they're telling us, in response to our surveys and the questions that we're asking. But, the problem and where that becomes an issue is you can lead somebody to an answer that you desire. And so your surveys often are biased by what you desire the outcome to be. And that's the challenge for every market researcher, that they construct these things in such a way that they can minimize that, right? But there's only so far you can go. And then, so now we take and we marry the stuff that we can see that consumers are telling us through their behaviors, right? And behaviors are things, that we can track, like, are they opening our emails? Are they clicking? What kind of emails are resonating with them? When they do go to our websites, what pages are they going to? What products are they telling us they're interested in by their behaviors, not necessarily their responses? Because here's the thing, this is probably my example or where I would draw. If we were to ask a customer, hey, do you want to be a full season ticket holder? I tell you what, when I was 17, absolutely, I'm raising my hand, and even now, right? But I'm always going to say, even at 17 with zero means, I want to be a full season ticket holder, right? But I couldn't afford to be a full season ticket holder, right? And so if I'm going to the website and I'm a 17-year-old, I'm looking at individual games. And so I'm telling the company that I'm interested in individual games. I'm not going to the season ticket page because I have went there once and I already know that I can't afford it. So I'm not going back there. And so it behooves us to be paying attention to what our customers are telling us, both directly through survey responses and indirectly through their behaviors and their activities.
It's also kind of an interesting trend for the context is coming online of the millennials who really are craving context and individuality anyway. And so it's interesting that's coming on board. And it's also security is coming that way as well. You used to be able to kind of bulk secure, but now you actually have to secure with context, which is hard. It's like it's getting more and more challenging to really get granular. What about blockchain? Sure. I was reading recently about a theater in England that had, instead of charging ticket prices to come into the theater to experience a comedian, they actually rolled out a pay-per-laugh model where they had these little tiny screens in front, baby screens behind the back seats of it, like a movie theater, where someone could pay per laugh, and they essentially segmented it up using blockchain so that then you were billed based on how much you laughed. And they actually found that they were making more money with tickets based on that model than they were. So it's an interesting experiment. It certainly hasn't rolled out everywhere, but have you been experimenting with any technologies and the impact of those?
So not in that regard. And that's fascinating, by the way. And it's, I think for the sports world, it's very complicated to kind of go down a model similar to that. There's things that we've dabbled in or talked about, and some teams have actually done, but it's one of those things like, hey, pay for a win. Like if you buy your ticket and, let's say you buy a 5-game plan and we guarantee wins out of 4 or 5 of those games. And if we don't, then you get your money back, right? And so that's kind of some things that we toyed with. But the problem in sports with that kind of model is that sometimes, and it's not always about winning, right? Like, if you've got a young team that's growing and they're trying to get experience for younger players, the end game isn't always 100% to win. You're always trying to win, but you're not going to sacrifice all costs to win. And so for an organization to take that approach in sports, it'd be difficult. And then, additionally, like I mentioned earlier, often you're coming to the games for the whole the entirety of the experience, not just the win and the loss. So it's become that relationship with the fan has become much more complicated than it was in the past. And so if you're a business executive and you're entertaining customers, it'd be really hard for us to quantify that. Now, I would say this: there could be an opportunity here on the business side with something like this, where you sign deals, or with the expectation that as an external business you're going to land incremental business or a certain amount of incremental business, and if our assets don't help you reach that goal, there could be some sharing in the cost, right? So I think there's probably a model along those ends that could be possible, but the pay per laugh would be very difficult, I think, for us to accomplish.
It was interesting, the testing that's going on in different avenues related to kind of an industry segment that was a traditional ticket price approach. A lot of our listeners are kind of on the maturity curve between 0 and, like you are, like 110% of really dominating data analytics and it really driving a lot of business. If you look back at your success that you in the trajectory along the way, were there some particular areas that if you had to do it again, you would have, with all of this knowledge that you couldn't possibly have getting started, but you now have, and you had to arc out that 10 years over again, would you do anything differently? Would you learn anything differently? What were some of the tips that you can give some of the leaders that are listening of what you would do if you had to do it over?
Yeah, I think one of the things that comes to my mind right away, and this is rewinding right to the beginning, and I'll use our CRM strategy as an example. One of the biggest mistakes that really caused us to spin our wheels as we were trying to get into this world of customization and understanding our customers at another level. And when we tried developing our own CRM system, that was a big misstep on our part. And I think part of that had to do with maybe a little bit of the arrogance on our end, and my background as a programmer and a developer, thinking that, we can do this better than some of these companies that have developed a proficiency, so like a Salesforce.com, for example, which we ultimately ended up partnering with. But prior to that, we're like, we can do what they do, and we can do it better because we know our business, right? And that was just, it set us back, and it really just caused us to lose a lot of valuable time. And I think to do something over, that would probably be, if we could go back and say, yep, let's just start with Salesforce right now and begin that automation and integration of information a couple of years earlier instead of spinning our wheels, would have been important. And then secondly, I think we took a lot of time before we put resources against centralizing our information and really making it operational from a data warehousing perspective, and using it to power some of our operational transactional systems. And that was partially because, we didn't know what we didn't know at that point. And, going back to your car example, it's like, okay, if, we were asking ourselves, how do we need to get there faster? We would say, let's get there faster on a horse. And, but it was, for us, it was like getting to that point where the engine of our data ecosystem needed to be built sooner, so that these systems we could realize the full benefit of these marketing automation systems and our CRM, systems. And so I think for us, and I think it was more just a matter of learning and that learning curve, because we were so early to the game at that time, at least in our industry, we were early to the game. And so we kind of fell on our faces a lot and had to pivot quickly and go in another direction.
So the data warehouse, in retrospect, that was something that if you had to do it again, you would double down efforts on and just move quicker on. When you're saying data warehouse, it's both selecting the data schema, just really diving into the mechanics of the architecture and how it's going to plug into Salesforce and your other systems. Is that what you're saying?
Doing that earlier, I think, would have been the important thing. I mean, the way infrastructure is now, it's really minimizing the needs for a data warehouse, because you can do so much. You don't necessarily have to centralize it first and then start pushing it to your operational systems. Like our data warehouse, early on, we didn't have a clear vision or strategy for everything we wanted to do with it, and that's what caused us to probably slip up a bit. But once that crystallized and became clear that, okay, look, we can be a lot quicker, a lot more customized if we can connect these dots. Back when the infrastructure was still a hurdle for us, right? So our network wasn't fast enough, or our systems, our data collection systems we weren't going to be able to access that data quick enough and then transform it and put it into a usable format for our operational systems quick enough. So we needed to centralize it, right? And so doing that sooner probably would have helped us accomplish some of our strategic goals quicker. We got there. It just took longer than it should have. And so that was really, I think, probably at the heart of what I'm trying to get at.
Are there certain skills from a team building perspective that you look at what you need core versus what you can subcontract or outsource? Because I've had some people say that go fast early to have a consultant come in that really knows and are experts at building, and then they're bolting on expertise as they go. But since you have the lens of this from a long period of time, like, are there certain percentage of skills that you just got to have in-house versus those that you can actually use from an external sources?
Yeah, I think so, and I think it's a mixed bag too. I think it varies by discipline and by what your goals are and what you're trying to accomplish. So the needs for consultants and experts and SMEs, and it's definitely there to help define your strategy and then understanding where they need to fit. But as it relates to our internal resources and how we've structured our teams, we're really a small business. We don't have a lot of employees. So what that means is we can't be terribly specialized, but we have to wear a lot of hats and we have to understand a lot of the different disciplines. When we're talking about data warehousing, we need to understand the structure and the design and the integration and how we're going to move the information. But that person can't just be a data architect or a database administrator, for example. They also need to have knowledge in how we're going to use this information to drive our business, and from a BI perspective, how we're going to roll that information up and present it, how we're going to model it, what we're going to do for analysis, and how we're going to use it to drive some of our business decisions and models that we use every day and every year. And so, we don't have the luxury, I guess, with staffing to rely on specialization. But what we can do is, if we have these people in positions that understand multiple steps of the process, or really the big picture, then we supplement our teams with those consultants or with those outside vendors that could help us accomplish those goals that we would have a hard time accomplishing because of the resource constraints.
Was there, and if you don't feel comfortable sharing, that's fine. I don't mind that, but I was wondering is there a core suite of like platform tools that you find that are really interesting, that add a lot of capabilities that you could share? Obviously, Salesforce is one of them. Is there any others that you'd be willing to share?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Salesforce has been a great product for us. They being open source in the back end, there's so much access, so many ways that we can customize it. I mentioned, we tried building our own, and then we realized that, one, there's a better platform already there, and guess what? It's completely customizable, so you can do everything you need to do anyways, right? All the things you were trying to do on your own, you can do with this platform and not have to take on the cost of development. And so Salesforce was big, and being able to integrate, and like that, and I say big, I guess what was big about it was the ability that we could integrate our information, do it rapidly, and build a robust ecosystem for our sales and marketing teams to use, because adoption on CRM systems is very difficult across all industries for any company, and that was no different for us. But when we were able to enrich and really provide this robust environment with so much information that maybe our sales teams didn't even realize about the customers they deal with on a regular basis, it was pretty easy. So that's one. From a BI perspective for us, we use MicroStrategy. We evaluated all sorts of tools, and there's great tools out there, and this is probably a space that's changing quicker than most that we deal with. But MicroStrategy, when we made the decision to use them for our primary platform, they just set themselves apart in really how they can, I guess, remote distribution and application development. And so a lot of the tools that we were looking at didn't really even have a strategy 5, 6, 7 years ago for application development and mobile development, and just this concept of being able to consume information while you're on your phone, for example. We had a directive or a goal, I probably should say, to provide a lot of information on iOS devices, so Apple phones, Apple iPads, and that was kind of where we were trying to go as an organization, to be real time in our information sharing, but also be able to do it on these devices. So obviously there's challenges with sizes and things like that, but MicroStrategy enabled us to build our reports, use it, kind of gather our information and put it in a presentable fashion on these devices and do it in a real time manner, which was really difficult to do with anybody else. And so that was, for us, a pretty important partner to have as well.
Yeah, they're actually in our backyard. That's and now I'm assuming you've gone onto other platforms like Droid and such for your mobile strategy. Is that true?
So we have the capability And I'm talking about internal applications. So we have the opportunity to do that, the capability to do that, but right now we're completely an iOS shop internally. So all of our internal consumption is on an iOS machine. So we haven't had to develop for the Droid. Now, our public-facing application, absolutely.
Okay.
So that's handled. We don't use MicroStrategy for that, but that application is, across all platforms, mobile platforms, is available.
So during a game experience, do you actually have a fleet of folks internally that where you are from a real-time perspective, if you had like a burst of folks coming in on one side of the stadium, do you have the ability to respond because of the way you're gathering data? I guess that's just one silly example, but do you have the ability to respond during the game as far as adjusting the experience based on the data that you're gathering? Or is it more, okay, this happened last night, we got to look at it next day to come up with a plan for the next game?
Yeah, we do. Using your example of people arriving, now it normalizes pretty quickly within an arena with people's arrival patterns as far as times and locations, just based on the geography of the space, like where people park and where they're coming from. So you see it normalize pretty quickly, and so we can set expectations. Now, what the variable that does kind of throw things, wrench into things is, hey, say there's an accident or a weather event, some sort of storm, that drastically changes arrival patterns. And we do have the ability, as we're watching these things, and we married some of those elements with our BI reporting, real-time event reporting. So we know that, okay, there's a storm. I mean, sometimes it's pretty obvious. You look outside, it's snowing, but we know that there's weather forecasted. We know that there's an accident because we're able to look at some of our applications and see that there was an event on the expressway that's causing a backup. And then now we're seeing that the arrival patterns are maybe not what we would expect, and we can adjust where we're positioning our ticket takers, for example, or scanners. So there's an element where we can do some of that. There's elements where we can look at even where people are sitting, how full sections are. That application, maybe for other venues like a football stadium, would allow you to adjust where the hawkers go. Even looking at where people are buying the most, say, beer or pop, you can kind of see that in real time based on the F&B information that comes through.
That's fascinating. So looking back, did you find it took a while for the business to have trust in the data that you were giving them? Because I do find a lot of those questions popping up is that I think there's so much power in the data, but do you find that right now it might be quite different, but did you find 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that the trust level was different?
Yes and no. And so kind of funny example. So when it supports someone's bias, when you're providing information to somebody and it fits what they know, they get behind it real quickly, right? Yeah, that's what I know. It supports my position. When it contradicted maybe what we thought we knew, that's when it becomes a challenge. And then you start dealing with data integrity questions and is this consistent across, all different elements, or are we being too narrow with our focus that's providing this discrepancy? And so, yes and no, but like what we did have the benefit of, I think a few years ago when we really started focusing on these data efforts and being a data-driven organization, was that we had leadership at the very top that really believed in us and believed in our processes and believed in what we were doing. And so that support from the top down helped us not only gain acceptance, but also helped us partner with different business verticals to perfect what we were doing, to make sure that we were providing the context and the right information for the need.
Do you ever have to apply like a Pareto's principle of what's important with the data, like an analysis of what's the 20% of this mountain of information that actually makes the difference, that actually moves the needle? Do you ever have that type of a conversation within either departments or with the CEO or with your peers?
So like the context, essentially?
Like there's so much data that can be decided about. How do you actually make the decision that this is the 20% of all of this important data that actually is going to help us accomplish our objective? And I was curious if you ever, is that a conversation that you help drive? Is it like, what was your role in helping coach the business on your perspective on which data is the most meaningful?
Yes, to two fronts. I think where it meets a company goal and objective, where we know we have this goal and objective, and we have information that can inform, whether our success or failure there would be one area, and then the other area would be where we're kind of presenting what we're finding or what we're seeing from a particular data set that was unexpected, right? And then now that's where you're going through the process of gaining acceptance and kind of opening that communication, that dialogue. Because you're right, there's so much information, you can be buried in it very quickly. And where early on we focused on trying to get our arms around all the information we could and structure it and consume it, you find out very quickly that you can't possibly be able to drill in and know the specifics of every particular question you possibly could ask, because the options are endless. And so what we use to derive really those decisions and what information we wanted to spend our resources to analyze, it was where it fit a business objective, where we had questions that needed to be answered, and then something that maybe tipped us off through that process that maybe we should look in another area that would give us some clues and information that then we could take and bring back to the business and say, hey, this is something that we're discovering, this is something that we're learning through some trend, and something that we're seeing that we think would be helpful for us to potentially discuss how we can pivot and make some changes to our processes to capitalize on an opportunity or prevent potential pitfall.
Does the machine learning at all, does pushing machine learning algorithms into certain parts of your data, has that yielded any fruit or any gold that has been helpful as a part of assisting human beings in their process, or is that right now just kind of built into all your reporting tools?
It's a little bit of a mixed bag. Like, we're not to the level, and just being, I guess, honest here, like we're not mature enough at this point that we've fully assimilated machine learning into our processes where we can really use that to understand and not, displace it, maybe is the word, human resources and time, and be a little more rapid and proactive. And I know that's on the business side. And there's things that we're doing on the basketball side of our business that maybe is a little more conducive, or we've leveraged machine learning a bit to produce algorithms or data sets that we should be using to drive our decisions, but we're just not there on the business side as much yet. And quite frankly, on the basketball side, we're just beginning.
Yeah. Well, it's good to know. I believe that these algorithms, they're going to be there to help us. It's kind of like the steam shovel and versus a shovel itself. Like the steam shovel just can allow us to dig faster and deeper and bigger, but we still use the shovel. And I think kind of those algorithms are going to be here, but I think we're sort of all maturing in that whole process right now to figure out best use case of them.
And it's fascinating too. I mean, there's platforms from BI platforms that are being developed that are really designed to kind of be like, with advanced machine learning, to be like Google, right? Where you literally would go out and you type your question in, and you're looking for, the answer to some financial question from 3 years ago, and you want to trend it over the last few years. And with just a couple of keywords, you plug it into a Google search, and it's going to kick out the report you need just based on previous searches and how it's learned your data and how your organization interacts with that data and requests that you typically make. And, there's platforms that are being developed. So, I mean, it's changing the landscape of these tools and how we even structure and use our data. It's changing at such a rapid pace that, it's really exciting.
Yeah, I think it's 5 years from now, we'll be doing just way different things with data, but we'll need the help of tools that can find the needle in the haystack. Sure. Well, Chris, I've had a lot of fun talking to you about data analytics, and I just have one question for you about the role of the CIO in the future, and the role of the person that's really in charge of analytics and this critical asset within their businesses. Where do you see the role of IT leaders moving forward? How do you see their role changing over the next 10 years as it comes to interacting with the business and the CEO and the leaders in the organization?
I really see that CIO role as really just being, one, crucial to the organization's success, but two, as I look at it and I apply it to sports in particular, I think those leadership positions that understand, kind of that hybrid position that understands the business goals and the directives, and can marry that with an understanding of technology and data and how to use these systems and use this information to meet those goals. Without a person like that in your organization, I think it's really, really hard. It's going to be increasingly hard to be successful as a business. And you can have all the smart people in the world, but you have to have that understanding at the highest levels that this is important and these systems are imperative to our success. Without necessarily just being a copycat organization. If you truly want to be innovative, you have to have that sort of resources that can bridge the gap there at the highest levels.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, Chris. Is there any resources that you think folks listening could really use that you've leveraged a lot through the years, or any books or any reading material that you found that really resonated with you, either with leadership or data analytics or just groups or organizations that you found kind of gave you an Archimedes lever to kind of accelerating your success?
I think probably some of the best resources I've been able to use to contribute to our success here as an organization have, one, just my peers in sports. And so this is probably where sports is a little unique. It is really unique, where we have this, the NBA as an example, we have, 29 other teams that are doing the same things, that have the same business model, and are trying to sell tickets, and most of them aren't necessarily championship ready, and so they're facing a lot of the same challenges. And so having that peer group that is so willing and ready to help and discuss best practices and their learnings has been integral to our success, right? So, when we look at it in a business perspective, our competitors on the floor, are very different than our competitors in business. And so where the Celtics and the Bulls maybe are our competitors on the court, when we step back and look at business, our competitors really are other in-market entertainment alternatives. So more likely it's our Major League Baseball team and our hockey team that are our competitors to the business. And so on the business level, we share a lot of best practices with each other among the NBA teams. And then secondly, I think for me, what's been very helpful in my development has been, as a general resource, has been other people in market, like our different peer groups. There's a couple different groups in the Detroit area of data and analytics professionals and IT professionals that meet on, either a monthly or quarterly basis, for networking events and discussions about different business problems. That has really helped me, because I've tended in the past to get too focused on sports, and I know that business and that maybe that industry really well, but there was a lack of understanding of what other industries are doing and doing really well. And so once I got more involved in these groups, I was able to leverage what they were learning now and apply a lot of that to what we're doing, and it helped me just be a more well-rounded, I think, professional in understanding, best practices there at the enterprise level, right down to like your small business level.
So kind of getting outside of your industry to take a peek what others are doing kind of gave you the ability to kind of pull and extract information from other communities and groups and approaches to solving problems that you found useful?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's really cool. It's funny because I just interviewed a guy last week who is a multi-billionaire across many industries, and he says he's really found it a huge advantage to not be an expert in the industry he was entering. And he thinks that coming at it from a beginner's mind was really helpful, because then he could dive in. So sometimes I think we all get so focused on our industry that sometimes looking outside the industry is really helpful and useful, because we look at it from a completely different set of eyes and then can bring things back to our world. And I think there's a real usefulness there for our brains from an innovation perspective.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, that's brilliant, because if you were already an expert in an industry that you were getting into, and you already had this experience, all you're going to do is replicate what you've already done. And It may be great, right? But it does stymie that innovation, because you're not going to be as prone to try new things. And to really
disrupt the model. Yeah, I mean, because
exactly.
We have like a talk about biases. We have a bias against disrupting our own model.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate your time today, Chris, and this has been going to be really helpful for my audience, and hopefully the Pistons have a great year coming up. It was a lot of fun, hearing you and I shared at least some of the time period commonalities of these two areas of the country kind of going at it.
Yeah. And well, the Celtics have a great team again, and they look like they're going to be good for a long time, and they have a phenomenal coach in Brad Stevens, and I wish you as a fan well, and that you enjoy them, and that you lose to the Pistons 4 times a year.
Well, I really appreciate it. Well, Chris, thank you very much for getting on the conversation with my community, and we'll talk to you hopefully again soon in the future.
Bill, thank you so much, and thank you for the privilege of being on your show.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So there you have it. This wraps another episode of Bill Murphy's Red Zone podcast. To get all the relevant show notes, please go to our blog at www.redzonetech.net /podcast. Additionally, make sure you go to iTunes and leave your comments in iTunes about the show. This helps our show rankings enormously, and it helps support the show. Until next time, I appreciate you very much for listening. Thank you.